Everybody, we're back here with Mike in his game room, and we're going to show you some amazing games that you've probably never seen before, and we're each going to pick one of our favorites out of the pool of classics and talk about those. So, Mike, what do we have up on deck?
So what we have here is Super Mario Wacky Worlds. It's developed for the CDI player, and it's kind of a unique thing because, as you know, Nintendo hasn't put Mario really on any other platforms. And what many people probably don't know is that Philips had been developing a CD player for the Super Nintendo, and Nintendo decided they weren't going to pursue that at the time, so to make nice with Philips, they allowed them to make a series of games for the CDI. And they had come out with some Zelda games, they come out with some Mario games that were kind of like...
the Zelda games, which we try to forget, scrub those from our brain.
But out of all those games, there was one that was in development that probably trumped all of them, and that was Super Mario Wacky Worlds, is what we have right here. And as you can see, it's a lot like the actual Super Mario game that was on Super Nintendo. In fact, like the background graphics are probably a lot better than what people remember from
Exactly. I was going to say that, I mean, if this was coming out at the time the Super Nintendo was, it would have made the Super Nintendo version look terrible.
Absolutely. And you've got all the same kind of moves. The artwork is very similar. And in fact, I believe the games are being developed in tandem. So much of the stuff that's here may have actually influenced some of what Nintendo was doing in Super Mario World.
Pretty cool. So basically, the only way you can see this is if you worked on the development of it, or you happen to luck upon one of these at, you know, a gaming event, or happen to pick one up just by searching for them.
Absolutely. And there's some people out there, there's different versions of the game that have been leaked out and that sort of thing, but this is probably the most complete version that's been able to come out.
That's fantastic. I mean, just amazing that, you know, we're actually seeing Mario on a platform other than Nintendo, right? At least, you know, in demo form. Excellent. So, Mike, up on the screen here we have Half-Life for the Dreamcast.
Yep, this is Half-Life as you know it on the PC, now on Dreamcast. A lot of people remember the intro sequence here, the very long intro sequence. All of it was intact, all ported over to the Dreamcast. And they also included Blue Shift and some extra expansion packs that were created for Half-Life.
Right, and so this is a game that was ready to come out for the Dreamcast right towards the end of its commercial life, and then it just disappeared, right? It was never released.
It was 100% done to. It's one of the biggest shames in game history because this probably could have changed the Dreamcast life cycle and extended it to probably another 1 or 2 years, especially with the PS2 on the horizon.
Right, and as well because the quality of the game equaled that of a PC, which cost, you know, $2,000 at the time. So here you're playing, and it's one of the first examples we have of a home console really equaling, in some cases surpassing, a PC equivalent, you know, as a $100 or $200 console versus a $2,000 PC.
Exactly, and I think people would have really gone after this game. It would have sold very well. And of course, you know, Half-Life didn't come out on PS2 for quite some time.
Sure. So the only place that you can actually see this is if you are a developer, happen to get extremely lucky and happen upon this, or know people in the business.
And luckily for me, I knew some people who were working on this title, so I was able to get at least one copy. And as you saw earlier, get the packaging, everything complete. It makes it one of the finest collectibles you can find out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and it looks exactly like Half-Life on the PC. So
yep, it's got all the textures. It's got all the kind of things you'd expect from Half-Life on the PC. You've got all the ambiance, all the characters walking around, all the dialogue, everything that was in the game is all here. Probably the only thing that would have hurt this game if it had come out was the long load times.
Yes, well, that's why they covered it with a very nice cinematic. So I think you and I are going to probably have to go back and play through this a bit more outside of the show. But here you have it, another rare game, never released to the market, Half-Life for the Dreamcast. So, Mike, we're going to be looking at a prototype game that has come out that was done by Atari, and I'm holding actually here a couple of loaner cartridges so our audience can see what these prototypes look like. So here we have a Cookie Monster EEPROM, here we have Pigs in Space from the Muppets catalog there, and then even rarer still is to see a game here by Activision, Plaque Attack. So as you were telling me earlier, Mike, the Activision loaner cartridges are even rarer than just finding the demo cartridges that Atari had put.
That's right. If you're out there and you're looking for early Activision games, it's very hard to find them. Luckily for me, I was just walking through a flea market and just saw a pile of games, and I just couldn't believe my eyes. There's some Activision prototypes.
Fantastic. So why don't we take a look at one of those prototypes that we have up here and waiting.
Okay, so what we have here is Donald Duck's Speedboat. It has never come out, but it was originally planned to be part of a whole series of games by Atari based off of Disney licenses. So they're planning on doing a Dumbo game and a whole series of games all based off of Disney properties. They had come out with some that were, of course, they came out a little bit earlier, like Sorcerer's Apprentice and these sorts of things, but these, again, were completely done, just never made it to market. So the premise of this game particularly, if I go ahead and hit the reset switch, you're Donald Duck, you're in a speedboat, and you're actually just racing to a finish line. And if you play through it and probably looking in hindsight, you're like, I can see why this game didn't come out. But it did have some nice graphics for Atari at the time, and probably, I could see this probably doing pretty well, but this came out also at the time when the crash really hit hard. So a lot of these games, the only reason they didn't make it to cart form was Atari and everything else at the time in the early 80s just kind of hit a hard crash.
And it's just really interesting to see these sorts of games now. You can actually see, you know, the plane that Donald's actually traveling on and how it's moving up and down in the water. So it's easy to see that this was in prototype form, which just makes it that, I think, in my opinion, that much more fun, right? To actually play through these things, knowing that you're seeing what the developer was trying to convey, right? You're kind of almost getting to experience their thoughts.
Well, that's part of the allure for a lot of people for prototypes is a lot of the games that may have come out in prototype cartridges but actually eventually came out, you actually get to see their thought process, because as the game, as you view it as in its early state, you'll see different kinds of enemies, different kind of behaviors, and even some levels that weren't included in the final game, you get to see those. So more than just like the collectible value and all this stuff is also the kind of the historical document of it, and actually see the thought process of the designer as he developed the game.
Really, really cool. So those are a couple of exceptionally rare games. Now Mike and I are going to each pick a single game out of his vast collection here that's representative of games we love and are from the classic pool of games. So why don't we go ahead and get that set up?
Cool.
Oh, here we go. Got a little tunnel runner action going on here. And let's talk a little bit about the game, Mike.
Yep.
So, you know, the game is just basically you trying to get to the maze and get to the exit before the monsters would find you, right?
Yeah, and one of the best things about the game was it's a first-person perspective game, something we haven't really seen since later in like PC games like Wolfenstein and all that sort of thing. So it's really rare for a game, especially on Atari, to have this perspective.
Yeah, and the other thing I think that made the game really just a scary game to play was the monsters, the noises of the monsters. You'd hear them sneaking up on you, and they'd actually get dimmer the further away they got. Right now, you can hear we don't have any monsters coming, but as I start racing through the maze to get to the end, we should start to hear a monster or two somewhere around here. Oh, actually doing pretty good.
You're too good at this game.
Yeah, see, look at that. Yeah, see, I've got the Atari 2600 old school mad skills. But again, you know, it's one of those games that really just kind of set this whole genre forward, right? It was the first real example of an action-based card shooter. Here we go. And the monsters, depending on the type of color they were, they had different properties. One would move faster than others, one would be smarter than others. And let's let him go ahead and get us. Death, and that was the thing you were all constantly dreading.
Well, I thought it was very interesting you picked this game because actually CBS Electronics had done a series of great games near the end of the big, game boom, and it's just before the big crash hit. And what they had done with the Atari cartridges themselves, they added extra memory to the cartridge so they could apply more music, more sound effects, and also that maze generation that happens at the beginning of the game. You wouldn't be able to do that on a standard Atari cartridge. They had enough RAM to actually generate a maze like that.
Right, and that's actually something we saw in later consoles like the Super Nintendo and the Genesis and even the NES, where they'd put in additional chips, additional memory into certain cartridges to give them a boost. Star Fox being one of the most famous ones, right?
Exactly.
The chips are done by Argonaut and those guys over there.
Exactly. So what they were doing at the tail end of the game industry before the big crash all carried over to the rebirth.
So that's my pick from the era of Atari 2600, Tunnel Runner by CBS. If you have a 2600 and access to eBay, go find a copy and check it out.
All right, so the game I chose, Pitfall 2. I have a huge love for platform games, and it really started with this game here. I enjoyed the first Pitfall, but Pitfall 2 actually had far more levels. It had great music, something I'd never heard of before on Atari 2600, but then the real version to play is the Atari 800 version. You get an entirely different adventure after you beat the first one.
Right, so I mean, immediately the first thing we see, we see Pitfall Harry, he looks kind of the same, but more detail in the backgrounds, more enemies in the game that we haven't seen before, including Quick Claw.
Yep, Quick Claw. If you guys, if any of our older gamers out there can remember, there was a Saturday Supercade in which they had a Q*bert cartoon, they had a Pitfall cartoon, and a Donkey Kong cartoon, as well as some others that would come in and out. And these characters were developed for that cartoon, and actually, as David Crane, the creator of this game, was developing the game, he thought he should include those characters in the game as well. And so it was quite an interesting tie-in. As the first time anything like that has ever happened in games. So.
Yeah, and what's really neat about this game too, the varying of the levels, you're actually going vertically now, right? It's not just a horizontal scroller.
Yeah, and this was the first time this has happened in platform games. And remember, Pitfall was the first platform game, so this is relatively soon after the first Pitfall. Nobody's seen anything like this before, especially the vertical scrolling. Smooth scrolling like that was even included on the Atari 2600 version, as well as the Commodore and all the other home versions. It was a very exciting thing.
Yep, and so, again, it's so many of the things that we see here in the earlier platform games really kind of made their way forward into, into regular platform mechanics that we see in just about every platform game today.
Oh yeah, Mario and Sonic and all these games owe a lot to these classic games, especially Pitfall.
So there you go, Pitfall 2 for the Atari 800. Great, great pick, Mike. And there you have it, 3 games you've never seen before, and a classic pick for both Mike and myself.
But you know what? I think I'm gonna get going and start playing some more here.
All right, let's play a little bit more Pitfall 2. What? This is one episode you're not going to want to miss. Come on in and put. Oh, I can't believe I did it. Well, how should I end it? On this episode of Level Up, we're going to be coming to you live. Not coming live from anywhere.